Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the actual architecture of modern wealth and the hidden mechanics of our financial system. We're talking about total financial sovereignty. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack exactly how traditional banking systems operate behind closed doors, and more importantly, how you can position yourself to adapt and thrive. The realities we're looking at today are incredibly urgent, so let's just get straight to it.
Let me ask you a question right out of the gate. Is your bank account actually a safe vault? Or is it, mathematically speaking, a wealth destruction machine? Take a second to really think about that. We're bypassing the traditional, comforting narratives today to plunge directly into a real exposé of retail banking. Because honestly, understanding the answer to this one single question is the absolute key to unlocking true financial autonomy and protecting what you've worked so hard to build. Part 1. The Hidden Banking Trap. Fractional Reserve Realities. Okay, let's pull back the curtain on how modern banking actually functions. Fractional reserve banking is how things work basically everywhere in the world. When you deposit your money, the bank doesn't just lock it in a vault with your name on it. Instead, they keep only a tiny fraction of those deposit liabilities in liquid assets on hand. The rest, they lend it right back out to borrowers. By doing this, the system essentially expands the money supply out of thin air. Now, it's a mechanism that for sure fuels economic growth by keeping credit flowing, but it inherently increases the risk that a bank simply couldn't meet all depositor withdrawals at once if a panic set in. The whole system fundamentally relies on trust rather than fully backed capital. So, there's a massive gap here between public perception and economic reality. The common belief is that your cash is just sitting safely locked away, completely untouched. But the harsh financial truth? Your deposit is essentially an unsecured loan to the bank. You are their creditor. Historically, if creditors lost faith and all tried to pull their money out at the same time, it triggered bank runs. It's like a giant game of financial musical chairs. This is a systemic risk so severe that it ultimately led to the creation of central banks to act as lenders of last resort, just to backstop a system operating on a precarious fraction of reality. Now get this, 0. That is a truly shocking data point. Historically, central banks actually mandated minimum reserve requirements to ensure banks had at least enough liquid funds on hand to protect a percentage of their depositors. It was the fundamental safety net of the whole fractional system. But as of 2020, the U.S. Federal Reserve eliminated minimum required reserve ratios entirely, literally down to 0. They stripped away this traditional safety net, choosing instead to manage monetary policy through interest rates paid on reserves. This effectively leaves the traditional system functioning without a mandated physical cushion, making the distinction between your deposit and bank debt practically invisible. Which brings us to part 2, inflation, the invisible tax, the true cost of safe cash. This leads right into a massive macroeconomic issue. If your money isn't just sitting in a vault, what is happening to its value while it's floating around in the system? Take a look at this powerful insight from institutional research by Cartwright Pension Trusts. They point out that governments managing high debt levels often rely on central banks to buy government bonds with money conjured right out of thin air. They call this essentially a discrete form of taxation. By pumping up the money supply, they continuously erode the value of the underlying currency. It is a hidden tax that secretly and continuously drains the purchasing power of absolutely anyone holding cash. You aren't losing money on paper, but your ability to actually buy things, it's actively evaporating. And when we build upon that historical context, the warnings become significantly more urgent. Analysts are pointing to historical setups from 1929 and 2008, periods defined by massive systemic failures tied to liquidity and credit crashes, and they're seeing mirrors in today's economic environment. Special committee research even hints at major global economic shifts and a looming 2026 black swan event. If a global monetary reset occurs, where central systems reevaluate currency mechanics and debt burdens, simple numbers on a crumbling traditional banking screen just won't be enough to save your purchasing power. You need a completely different strategy that relies on hard assets and mathematical growth. Let's look at that solution. Part 3. The 9-7-5-1 compounding rule, the mathematical tipping point. We're pivoting from the problem to the exact mathematical framework used to outpace inflation and secure your wealth. It's a non-negotiable 4-number framework used to build a serious compounding engine. First up, 9. That represents a realistic 9% base historical return of broad markets. It anchors your expectations in reality rather than chasing risky high-yield fads. Next, 7. This is the critical minimum number of years you must stay consistently invested before compounding actually feels like a miracle rather than a slow, frustrating crawl.
Third, 5, stands for 5 layers of true diversification. We're not just picking different tech stocks here, but utilizing entirely different asset classes to protect your downside against severe market shocks. And finally, 1 represents making just one single annual contribution increase of 5% to your investment pool. This is the exact formula that transforms a stagnant portfolio into an unstoppable wealth engine over time. Patience here is mathematically rewarded. For the first few years of this framework, the growth line is practically flat. It can really feel like your money just isn't working for you, and this is exactly where most people give up and pull their cash out. But year 7, that is the mathematical tipping point where the compounding snowball finally gathers enough mass. Suddenly, the curve goes vertical. Your returns begin generating their own returns in a massive way, marking the exact moment where time begins doing the heavy lifting for you, vastly outpacing that invisible tax of inflation we talked about. Part 4. The buy, borrow, die loop, the secret playbook of the ultra-wealthy. So, how do the ultra-rich preserve these compounding assets indefinitely? They use a very specific, advanced liquidity strategy. It's a 3-step loop. Step 1, buy assets intended to grow over time, like the deeply diversified portfolio we literally just discussed. Step 2, borrow against those assets using a securities-based line of credit, or an SBLOC. This lets you access immediate cash for your lifestyle or even further investments without triggering a taxable event. You're taking a loan, not making a sale. And Step 3, die and pass those assets to your heirs with a stepped-up cost basis. By using debt as a flexible tool rather than a trap, their core investments just keep compounding entirely untouched by capital gains taxes. Under normal circumstances, selling assets triggers hefty capital gains tax obligations. Nobody likes those. But by utilizing the SBLOC to borrow against your assets instead of selling them, you bypass those tax forms entirely. And under current U.S. tax law, there is a mechanism called the step-up in basis. When the original owner passes away, the government legally resets the asset's original purchase price to its current market value for tax purposes. So, say you bought something for 10 grand and it's worth $1 million when you die, your heirs inherit it as if they bought it for $1 million. This legally wipes the slate clean for the heirs, entirely mitigating the impact of capital gains taxes upon death and allowing generational wealth to remain totally intact. Let's put some numbers to this. Check out the hard math JP Morgan uses to illustrate this strategy. Imagine you have a $1 million portfolio, and you suddenly need $200,000 in cash for a major purchase or a new opportunity. Option 1 is to sell. Well, you trigger an immediate $62,000 tax bill, and you permanently cripple your long-term growth by removing that capital from the market. Your compounding engine stalls. Option 2 is to borrow against it via an SBLOC. You pay zero tax, you get your $200,000 in cash, and your entire $1 million stays fully invested, maximizing the exponential compounding curve we looked at earlier. Mathematically, the numbers heavily favor borrowing because the growth of the untouched million far outpaces the interest on the loan. But we definitely need to remain objective here. This strategy is absolutely not without risk. If the market dips heavily and the value of your collateral drops below a certain threshold, you could face a margin call. That would force you to immediately deposit funds or sell assets at a loss just to cover the difference. Furthermore, variable interest rates can change the cost of borrowing over time, which can eat into your margins if rates suddenly spike. This is exactly why this approach requires maintaining a very healthy portfolio cushion. You never ever borrow the maximum allowable amount, and it requires incredibly careful long-term financial planning. Which brings us to our final act, Part 5, Total Financial Sovereignty, Transitioning to the Modern Golden Vault. When you change how you see the world, you change how you move through it. That principle from the Sovereign Vault captures exactly what we're discussing today. To adapt to the Great Financial Reset, proactive individuals are actively transitioning away from institutional reliance and moving toward true financial independence. It's about taking informed action, utilizing anti-bank assets like hard commodities, building untouched compounding portfolios, and leveraging liquidity without sacrificing your equity, all to create your own secure vault. You essentially become your own bank, completely insulated from fractional reserve failures and the silent drain of inflation. So I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. The financial system is undeniably resetting around us. Inflation is secretly taxing your cash, and the old rules of fractional reserve banking have fundamentally changed, leaving the traditional safety nets in the dust. So ask yourself, is your wealth currently trapped in a crumbling traditional bank, fully exposed to these invisible risks? Or have you positioned it securely in a sovereign vault, actively compounding for your future? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I highly encourage you to review your own financial architecture with these realities in mind.